This is a tough issue, but one that must be discussed. And so I welcome all of you and thank you for joining us. When we first talked about having this conversation, the recent mass shootings in the country had not occurred. None of us expected to have this conversation become so timely, but here we are, one day after yet another mass shooting in Orange, California that happened yesterday, and people lost their lives. Now, before yesterday, there were deadly shootings in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as Boulder, Colorado. And then since then, we've heard President Biden call for an ban on assault weapons. In the Congress, the House passed two bills aimed at strengthening gun laws, requiring background checks on all gun sales and transfers. Those bills now face a tough road in the Senate. Here in Washington State, the State House just passed a bill that would ban the open carry of firearms at public demonstrations and at the state capitol. That bill heads back to the Senate for a final consideration of amendments. Now, it passed the House 57-40 and initially passed the Senate 28-20. And that sets the stage for our conversation this evening as we try to find some common ground on guns in our society and the Second Amendment. Joining me for our conversation this evening, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence co-founder Margaret Heldring. Also with us is Dave Workman. Dave is an author, editor-in-chief at thegunmag.com. He's communications director for the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. And joining us this evening from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where she teaches at the Air Force Academy, is she's a professor there of military and strategic studies. Kyleanne Hunter, she's a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran and founder of Vets for Gun Reform. Now, for those of you joining us, we mentioned this earlier, but we would like to take your questions. You can submit those into the Q&A dialogue box. Please make them short and to the point, and please make them a question. I appreciate that if you do that very much. So thank you all to our panelists for joining us this evening. I really appreciate you being here. Let me begin with you, Margaret, about why grandmothers wanted to have this grand conversation and the importance of it as you see it.
Thank you, Enrique. And grandmothers would like to begin by thanking MOHAI for this partnership and thanking Dave and Kyleanne for being participants in this conversation. Enrique, as you mentioned, we have a tough problem in this country. We have a problem with guns and gun violence, and people have very different points of view. Organizations have very different points of view. We've been working on this problem for a long time. The most recent chapter in trying to find solutions to this problem really took off after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And here we are a little over 8 years later, and we've come up against a pretty important paradox. While the movement to try to find solutions to this problem has grown and been very dedicated and effective, the problem has not gotten better. The problem has gotten worse. And this means that we cannot rely entirely on legislative solutions to this problem. As wonderfully as Washington State has sort of done, and as slow as the federal government is in taking action on this, we realize that we cannot look only to state legislatures or the US Congress. We have to try new things. And so grandmothers feels that a new thing might be sitting down and talking together and seeing if we can't find common ground, a common path forward. In addition to this problem, the whole country is weary of partisanship and of battling and of fighting. And it is really time to be civil and listen and to learn from each other. That may be a promising way to move forward. And so that is what inspired grandmothers, thinking, well, you know, we're the elders in society now, we're the older folks. If anybody should be able to model how to listen, how to learn, how to reach across an aisle, how to build a bridge, it should be grandmothers and grandfathers. And so the combination of the problem, the paradox, and our place in our society prompted us to undertake this, and we appreciate everyone doing it with us.
Dave Workman, do you listen to your grandmother? Or did you listen to your grandmother?
Occasionally.
Occasionally. Oh, you're one of them, huh?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let
I
me ask
listened a lot to my grandfather, though. So
well, I minded both of them. Otherwise, I would have been in big trouble for my mother, period, and my father. But Dave, you know, this is such a sticky issue because I think there are obviously many Americans that are gun owners and feel that they have a constitutional right to have their gun, and yet we have these incidents that happen, and people are frightened and scared about it. So, with that in mind, about how we find some middle ground, what's your sense of how to accomplish that?
well, first, you said a lot of people in this country feel they have a right. I have to correct that. The U.S. Supreme Court says they have a right. They've said it twice in this century. The first time was with the Heller case in Washington, D.C. Second time was with McDonald v. City of Chicago, which not only struck down, it nullified the Chicago handgun ban, but it also incorporated the Second Amendment to the states via the 14th Amendment. So feelings have nothing to do with it. That right exists. And that's part of Supreme Court jurisprudence. So I think where this conversation and maybe all the other conversations go wrong is that you don't need to do anything about guns in this country. What you need to do is something about the people who misuse guns in this country. The shootings in Georgia and Colorado, and I think they're going to give us an opportunity that we haven't had in a long time, because both of the alleged gunmen are still alive. They didn't take their own lives. And frankly, as a journalist who's been covering this issue for almost 40 years, I think it's going to give us an opportunity to see if some psychologists or psychiatrists can get inside of their heads, find out what makes them tick, and find out why they did what they did. Of course, if they're convicted in a court of law, that's important, because a firearm by itself is not going to hurt anybody. And there are about 100 million, maybe more than 100 million people in this country who own firearms. They've never hurt anybody. They've never committed a crime. They're just exercising a constitutional right. And they feel that every time something like this happens in Colorado or in Georgia or yesterday in California, they're the ones who get penalized for crimes they didn't commit. And they're not very happy about that.
I think the gentleman that is still alive, the suspect in the Orange shooting, is still alive, actually.
Yeah, I believe, yeah, he was wounded, I think. And
right, yeah. So let me move on to Kyleanne here before we get into some specifics about things. Your take on this, Kyleanne, and how you, as someone that has been in the military, and you've been on kind of both ends of these things. So go ahead.
Absolutely. And seeing some of the stuff in the chat, I'll also add a little more to my bio here. I started shooting skeet competitively when I was 12. Have been around guns my entire life, competed in 3-gun matches for a big portion of my Marine Corps time. My job there, I was a Cobra pilot, literally fly a flying gun. That is my job. Yet, because of the sum of my experiences, am 150% committed to actually reasonable gun reform in this country. And I think to address something Dave said first, and when he talks about the Heller decision, I think it's important to note that in that decision, Justice Scalia noted directly in black and white, saying the right of the Second Amendment is not an absolute right to own any gun anywhere at any time. It is the right of individuals to own firearms, but that's not an absolute unrestricted right. And that is right in the jurisprudence. So we can take it down that road we want. But the other side, I think, that we don't talk about are two main things. One is that every right carries a responsibility. And I will say that is one thing as someone who stood up, took an oath to protect and defend this Constitution. I respect these rights with my life. Have lost my best friend protecting these rights. But we have to put in this context that every single one of these rights carries a responsibility to our fellow citizens. And that aspect, that part, that this is about more than us. It is about more than my individual right to do a thing. It is, as an American, about my responsibility to use the freedoms that this country gives me to make it better for everybody else. And I think to take it one step further with the Constitution, if you look at the preamble as to why the founders created this country, was to establish justice. So yes, absolutely, we need better justice when we talk about holding people accountable, not just the people who shoot, the industry who have gotten away with lax laws and lack of oversight, and industries that are knowingly taking advantage of loopholes to make a profit. They need to be held accountable when we talk about justice. It was to create domestic tranquility. I don't care who you are, when your kids are scared to go to school, it is not domestic tranquility. We have a problem. When in my state right now, there are people who we have mental health counselors at grocery stores again, because people are afraid to go grocery shopping. That is not domestic tranquility. I spent a grand total of about 9 years of my life in war zones, if you put that together. That's not an insignificant amount of time. People there, they're afraid to go to school. They're afraid to go to the grocery store. So this paradigm of fear that is existing right now, that is, I say, 100% on a negligence of us taking on the responsibility to each other that comes with this right. We've got to get away from what do I do, what's me, what is about me, and to how am I making my community, my society, and ultimately my country better by each action that I choose to take.
Kyleanne, I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask one question here. You're a gun owner?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So-
I am still a gun owner. Have been for, I won't reveal how many years now because of my age here in this timeline here. Yeah. But with that, I look at this as when I choose to bring a tool that is designed to kill and destroy, that is the purpose of this tool. And it is something that is not theoretical in my mind. I have pointed these downrange in anger and taken human life. This is not a theoretical, I might sit and do this. When I choose to bring that tool into my house, my first question has to be, how is my action protecting myself and those around me? And that talks about things like safe storage, ensuring that every gun in the home is actually stored safely. Yeah. It's things about educating and talking to others in my community about the fact that I have one. If they are uncomfortable, letting them be that way, not trying to bully them into wanting to come into my home, actively educating others, and advocating for common sense policies that I know keep people safe, especially when we talk about better access to mental health care. If you support a shrinking access to healthcare of any sort, you can't say you support responsible gun ownership right now. Yeah. Because they throw up these mental health flags. It's mental health. Well, what are you doing to ensure people have access to that care so that they do not become a harm? So yeah,
I want to get Dave's reaction to what you said. Dave?
Well, what part of what she said would you like me to react to?
It's up to you.
Kyleanne, thanks for your service. It's a tough thing to be in a war zone and come back from that. It's hard for anybody to really understand what people who's been in a war zone go through. That said, I don't disagree that firearms safety should be paramount. I'm a firearms instructor when I'm not writing about it. And I think that we do have a responsibility as well as a right. And I know what Scalia wrote in the Heller ruling, and that's without stating anything. Maybe you don't have a right to have any kind of a firearm for any purpose, anytime. But where do we draw the line? We know that what they call assault weapons are not really assault weapons. You've been in the military and you certainly should know the difference. We know that bad guys don't go to gun shops to buy their guns. They get them through illicit means most of the time. There have been studies that demonstrate that. We've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 million, and that's the most recent number that I've heard of semi-automatic modern sporting rifles in private hands in this country. There's tens of millions of handguns out there. I think for the 100 and some million gun owners, there's something like 435 million firearms in private ownership out there. Those guns are not a danger to anybody in the hands of responsible gun owners. And people who lock up their guns, they keep them in safes. I got a couple of gun safes that I keep my firearms in. I go to the range as often as I can. Always keep my firearms away from people who I think might misuse them if they get their hands on them, which I've never really had an experience with anybody I know who might misuse a firearm. I've seen people who have taken their lives with firearms and with other means. Two people I know jumped off of Snoqualmie Falls during the early part of my career, and I helped bring them out in the back of my truck. So I'm not sure if we can just narrow a problem that we have in this country down to doing something about guns. As I said earlier, the challenge is doing something about the people who misuse the firearms. When we have recidivist criminals running around out there, they do seem to get their hands on guns.
Dave, can I just jump in
Sure.
here? Let's get some specifics here.
Okay.
One of the things that we know about the incident in Atlanta is that well, actually, I think in Colorado, this has happened where the issue of background checks and the issue of making sure that you're going to check out that person that is purchasing a gun had been at play here, and then was kind of the city had a background, Boulder, right, had a background check, and then a judge had ruled that they couldn't do that because of state law. This is one of the issues that comes up about making sure you have thorough background checks about who's going to own a gun, which goes to what I think you're saying about who the gun owner is. What is wrong with strengthening those?
Well, just how strong should a background check be? Both of these guys, the guy.
Well, do you agree that there has to be a background check?
Not necessarily, no.
Really? Why?
Well, for one thing, if I know somebody and I've known him for 35 years and he's never committed a crime, and if I want to sell to him or let him borrow a firearm, he shouldn't need to go through a background check. I know this guy. I know he's a responsible person. Some of these proposals would have me forcing my kids to take a background check if I wanted to give them or sell them a firearm.
Can I step in here? Because that's just like patently not correct if you look at the policies that are out there on background checks.
Well, I'm talking about some of the proposals, Kyleanne.
Right. But if you look at anything that is actually made it through, that'd be the same thing as saying, I can go on the NRA or Gun Owners of America website and see a proposal that says we should get rid of every single gun law that's out there. That hasn't made it. So let's stick to, if we're going to start talking specifics, let's stick to what has made it to either become law or work its way to become law. Because other than that, I mean, we can spin this out into some of the most far out there proposals. And I think if we start to drill into some of the specifics, we can find a lot of common ground. Because the same things that you're talking about, doing something about the people, absolutely. That's why I started going down. How are we ensuring better access to mental health care? How are we ensuring that there are comprehensive, verified, and unbiased looks at who these people are? Because we talk about someone I've known for 35 years. my buddies who came home with me, who I knew and fought a warrant, who never committed a crime in their life, never prior to this had shown any signs of struggling, bought a gun from a gun show where they didn't need a background check, no waiting period, walked home and blew their brains out. If it was up to me, my judgment would say, sure, I should be able to get them a gun because I have used guns. I shot competitively with them. But it's also not just up to me because I do have inherent biases. It's why waiting periods work. It's why permit to purchase. It's why training works, because the more you actually understand the person who you are giving a deadly tool to, and there are external verifying bodies about this, it's why things like extreme risk protective orders, that you can actually say this person shouldn't have access to guns right now. Doesn't say forever. It's not a criminal process. You're not going to lose a job or a background check or your right to own them. Every single provision that's out there on background checks has provisions that if I am struggling, I can call up my buddy and say, hey, take my guns for a few days because I'm in a rough spot. And they're not a criminal if they take my guns away because of background checks. So let's dispel some of this, I think, extremist rhetoric, which is a big part of the problem, is that the conversation is based about fear on both sides. On one side, it is based on this fear of every time something happens, they're going to take all my guns and rights away. And on the other side, it's fear because all guns are scary. Both of those are wrong. Let's just admit they're both wrong right now and get to that middle.
Let me bring the
I think
grandmother in here.
Margaret
We need
had
to
her,
listen to
Margaret
our
had her hand up
grandmother.
here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. The grandmother would like to say a few words.
It's abuelita in my world. So
Oh, okay.
go ahead.
Abuelita. Thank you. A couple thoughts. I already hear some potential common ground, and I'm really very grateful for that. I hear us talking in terms of we and not just me, that we are a society. We are a set of communities in this country. We want to think about each other. I also hear that there's an endorsement of along with the right comes a responsibility. I hear that there is an interest to look for strategies and tools that keep guns, which are, as Kyleanne says, designed to harm and kill, out of the hands of people who should not have them. There are things that are emerging already as points that we share. Two things I'd like to say. One is that these mass shootings get a lot of headlines, as they should. They're scary events. They pass the fear around. They increase the fear in this country. Kyleanne, your story of counselors at the grocery store is vivid and deeply upsetting. But there are many kinds of gun violence, and I don't want us to forget that. I think, Dave, you referenced another one, suicide. There is homicide. There's gun violence that plays out in Black and brown communities differently. There are unintentional shootings when a child finds a gun in a parent's closet and curiosity leads to tragedy. I think it's important to keep that big picture in mind. The other thing is, listening to this, it occurs to me that we've all been operating in a vacuum, which means that there has not been much research for many, many years that point us to what are the real risk factors and what are the possible remedies? What are the best prevention strategies? How can we move this whole situation upstream so we're not just talking about what to do about the gun, but we're talking about how to prevent such impulses, such inclinations, such experiences to begin with. So I wanted to put those in, and now the grandmother will listen again.
Well, that's good though, grandmother, because you have brought some insight that I think you've been listening and you've been giving us some feedback here. So, okay, let me ask you, Margaret, what as a grandmother do you want to see?
Yeah.
Where do you see you can find, with what you just heard here,
Yeah.
finding that common ground? What do you think is possible?
Safety. Really focusing on safety when it comes to guns, gun ownership, and embedded in safety is this blend of rights and responsibility. I know that Dave did a great job enumerating how many guns there are in the country and in different households. And some early research is beginning to take a look at that too. And it is deeply disturbing to learn how many gun owners do not store their guns safely. Dave, I know you do. I have a lot of respect for how you approach gun ownership in this world, because we've been on a panel before. We've talked, I know you do, but there are a lot of people in this country that don't have that kind of ethic about them. So I would like to see us come together around the issue of gun safety. How can we teach people? How can we create social norms around gun ownership, that gun ownership and safety exist in the same sentence? They come with the same breath.
Is that possible, Dave? I mean, do you
Yeah,
think that's already
I
happening?
think it is. In fact, my personal experience, when I was in junior high school, which is about 1,000 years ago, in
I'm right up there
Tacoma.
with you, so you know.
Yeah, I did. I know. We're running a race, and I hope you win the race to the doorstep of the nursing home. So,
Yeah, there you go.
but Enrique, when I was growing up in Tacoma, we had a health teacher who every fall he would bring firearms to the school. And talk about 15, 16-year-old kids, or 14 and 15-year-old kids who were maybe going hunting that fall, who maybe didn't live in a home that had firearms in it, but they might go to a friend's home. And he gave us a course on firearm safety. And I've always been an advocate of returning some sort of a firearm safety class. It could be optional to the public school system. It ought to be part of the curriculum, because we can reach those kids at an age when I think they're ready to absorb it and understand what they're talking about, and teach them a little bit about firearm safety. If you find a gun in a friend's home, leave it alone. It's not yours. Just don't touch it. And that's something that I think we really need to look at. It's part of the puzzle. It's not the whole solution, but it's part of the puzzle. Now, there's something else too. Kyleanne mentioned permits to purchase. Apparently, she's not familiar with the story of Carol Bowen in Berlin Township, New Jersey. Carol was following the law in the state of New Jersey. This was about 5-6 years ago. She applied for a permit just to buy a handgun because she had an protection order against a former boyfriend. The police chief there sat on that application for weeks and weeks. Carol went to the police department to find out what the holdup was, didn't get any satisfaction. The next morning, she was stabbed to death in her own driveway by this guy because she couldn't have purchased legally a handgun for defense against this guy at her own home. She was murdered. Nobody can speak for her anymore. And that is one problem we have seen with requiring permits to purchase, because the bureaucracy tends to sit on those things for as long as they possibly can. I know there's a better way to do that sort of thing, but you shouldn't have to be required to get a permit to exercise a constitutionally protected right. Tell me where I'm wrong.
So
Mark.
if I can address that one too, I think
Sure.
what you hit on isn't necessarily a fault with the actual thing. It's a fault with the process, which is actually a big part of a lot of these things. It's a fault with a process that is underfunded, under-resourced. And I think if you look at the ATF, if we want to go, to continue to move this sort of left of bang, so to speak, upstream, we mentioned the access in the criminal market for homicide. Let's move this away from mass shootings, that they don't get guns. Typically, they don't walk into a gun store and buy guns. That is true. However, over 90% of guns that are recovered in crimes are traced back, through the ATF's e-trace system to less than 5% of gun dealers in this country that are there. And I think more than that, you look at that, more than 70% of gun dealers have no violations at all and are doing everything right. Yet we talk about process. You talked about the bureaucracy. The ATF has been so gutted in its oversight capability and so hamstrung against the ability to actually go after dealers for violating the law. And these are things like when I was at Brady, we did a huge Freedom of Information Act request to actually get the inspection reports on dealers that were there. And when we pulled them this way, we found that there are egregious violations, everything from having mismatched inventory sheets to filing fraudulent insurance claims for lost guns that were sold out the back for profit, to failure to complete background check forms just to get volume out because they didn't want to take the time to do them. And they were all, not all, a vast majority of them downgraded to a warning letter because there wasn't the capacity to actually take care of these things. So moving it up, what you've identified isn't necessarily a process. We know if you dig into the studies, and I want to bring back to something that Margaret said, one of the things that is leading to a lot of problems in this debate is that, because of things like the Dickey Amendment, research into gun violence has been gutted for a generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we end up then with is anecdotes. And as tragic as Carol's life is, and I can go on hundreds of stories who are tragic for people who did get their hands on firearms, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so it leads to emotional, fear-based, and often irrational discussions because we haven't invested in meaningful research. When automobile fatalities were at the worst, the government didn't just decide to make laws and go for advocates. It invested in public health focused research to solve the problem. We've lost a generation of that. And in that generation, the number of guns that are out in our society has skyrocketed. And is that good? Is that bad? What we are left with now is emotion rather than facts. So if we want to solve this, the first thing we need to do is invest in research, real, meaningful research. These small parts of research that we have show that some things work, but we don't have enough yet. And so we need to invest in that high level research. Research is not going to take your guns away. We need to actually research it, and we need to invest in the processes we have to be able to stop these dealers that are putting profit over people's lives and give resources to states' attorney generals to go after them. We need to fund intervention systems in these Black and brown communities. We need to fund local law enforcement offices to work through permits and purchases, to work through extremist protective orders.
I'm going to jump in here because I want to get Dave to respond quickly to this, and then also I want to kind of move on to another area. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, what I'm hearing right now is a discussion about something that there's a lot of confusion about. We're not talking about guns here, really. We're talking about rights. Now, the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms. I touched on that earlier. Driving is a privilege. You've got to be able to separate privileges from rights, and you've got to understand the difference. I learned the difference back when I was taking high school civics. I don't know if they even teach that anymore.
They don't.
Which is a pity. Enrique, maybe you and I should work on that a little bit. When you start talking about adding this regulation or that regulation, where do you draw the line? Where are you prepared to draw the line that says, look, on the other side of this line, you're stepping on somebody's rights, or you're stepping on the rights of a whole lot of people? The right exists for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. If you're a U.S. citizen, you have these rights. You enjoy these rights, and it's not up to me or you or some legislature somewhere to say, okay, we're going to start regulating this like a privilege, because at some point you erase the right and turn it into a privilege. And believe me, when the government gets a hold of a privilege, they ratchet down on it just as hard as they can. And you have to remember, rights are rights, and they're special things. You got to take care of them. You got to be really zealous about them. Like, the First Amendment. I made my living with the First Amendment. So have you, Enrique. And I know that you're as protective of the First Amendment rights as I am, but there are 9 other parts of the Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment is number 2 on that list. And we've got to be extremely careful about where we tread, because at some point, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe 5 years down the road, we may have a Supreme Court ruling that says, you know what, you guys have been fouling this up since day one. You can't do this under the Constitution. You can do this under the Constitution, but you've got to stop all the in-between stuff. And maybe that's what we need to be bringing into this. It's got to be part of the conversation.
That actually opens the door for where I want to move into.
Okay.
And that is a question, some of the questions that we've been receiving from those that are joining us this evening. Which, by the way, we have a good size group of people that are joining us this evening, because this is an issue I think people are very concerned about. I'm glad to see that. Also, we have people that are joining us around the country. And we're talking about a right. And so here's a question that we received. Why is there a need for anyone to privately own an automatic rifle? Can that be a piece that we legislate? And I think that is a question out there. Why does anybody need a weapon of mass destruction or a weapon of war? Why do we have to have those?
Automatic rifles are regulated already. It is they aren't, automatic rifles are not, no one here who's on the call could walk in and buy an automatic rifle right now.
I think it's we're really talking about kind of the assault weapon.
I think they're talking about some of the semi-automatic rifles.
Right.
And I think, I mean, I can lean into some of that, and then, but in also respond to some of what Dave has said, I think, again, I want to drive us back to getting away from whataboutism and this sort of extreme, like, let's continue to walk in. Like, if we talk about having responsibilities or some sort of bubble around the way we access rights, it means they're all going away. The First Amendment right is an absolute. There are things that you can't say. There are libel and slander laws. You can't go and scream fire in a crowded building. We put some of these restrictions because we are a society. And to ladder things back up to the preamble, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to live here and to live free of fear. We have to take that and balance these things. That's part of our country. And I will say civics still is taught. I teach undergrads right now. They have a better grasp than I think a lot of people realize on these and want to grapple with these issues. But insofar as if we're talking about what are often commonly referred to as assault weapons, which is a bit of a meaningless term, which is true. It doesn't fit the bill on a lot of things that are there. I think what we need to look into is this justification of why does this right exist, to move this back further. The right, if you go into the framing and you go into the original document, it is a well-regulated militia being essential for our country means that the right to bear arms will not be infringed. And so the whole reason this right was given to us was, again, for communal. How are we making society and community better? If you go into the beginning, I think there's a lot of this focus on the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's look at that beginning part where it focuses on a well-regulated militia that is essential for the collective, for the country, not for me to sit with my arsenal and have, and stand my ground. That's nowhere in the Second Amendment does it say, I have a right to stand on my ground and defend property. Now, it has been interpreted through jurisprudence in several different ways. The individual interpretation is very new. It is one that the courts are grappling with at every level. It's one that's important for us to grapple with. The idea of the ability to restrict access to certain kinds of guns is something the courts have ruled both ways on. They have ruled in favor of assault, what are referred to as assault weapon bans, because that's just the nomenclature used. They've ruled in favor, and they've ruled against them. We had a federal one for a while. That is something that's grappling with the courts. But I think when we're talking about rights, we need to talk about, again, the spirit and the intent behind them. If my demand for what I believe is a right hurts somebody else, then we need to have a real serious conversation about why that right exists. And so I think it comes.
That's nonsense. If you do something irresponsible with a firearm, that's not the time for a discussion about some rights. It's a time for a discussion about how long we're going to lock you up. And you seem to have lost track of that. If you talked about what Justice Scalia said in the Heller decision, he also said that the right to have a firearm is not part of a militia. It's not a requirement.
No, he moved it to an individual right, but he also said it's not every gun everywhere.
I know that's what he said, but what you just said is nonsense. You're talking about holding everybody in the country accountable and penalizing every law-abiding citizen because of what you might do. And
why? Where did I say I want to throw people in jail for what?
No, I said that. I
never wanted to penalize people. I say we need to have a conversation around why these rights exist and how we are making our society better. Nowhere in there did I recommend any laws be passed. Nowhere in there did I say we should restrict or take anything away from you. I said, we want to talk about rights. Let's also talk about the responsibilities and the intent. Because if we go back to the framers' intent, every single one of these rights was to make a more perfect union. That word union means that it is about more than just one individual.
Let me jump in here. I want to bring the grandma in, because I think we need some words of wisdom here to ground us again, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I mean, at least let's see if we can find something that, I like the idea that I think we agree on safety. I think that everybody agrees
absolutely.
on that. Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, it sounds also like we agree on the need for research as well, that we've been operating on emotion and on anecdote and on what those of us who spent some time studying how to do research learned, the N of one problem, taking one example and making it the truth about a whole. So I'm glad to see those things of agreement. I'd like to actually ask Dave a slightly different question. This came up on our phone conversation the other day, Dave, and I said to you, I really like this. I want us to learn and understand more, put aside our Second Amendment issues and where to draw the line. What is it about guns? What you were saying, you need to understand what guns mean to people. And I said to you, yeah, I'd like to understand what guns mean to people because, and Kyleanne, maybe you can answer this too, having had shooting in your youth and your military service. But I don't understand. And I think a lot of people don't really understand. We get stuck on this argument of rights and so forth, but taking it down a level, taking it a little bit deeper. What's about guns?
Well, I think that a firearms ownership represents the difference between citizens and subjects, if you want to get right down to basics. But we've also been talking about something else, and you and I chatted about this the other day. When I reminded you that it's not gun violence that you need to talk about, it's just violence, violent crime. We keep hearing this term gun violence, which I think is an invention of the gun control lobby. But what do you call it when somebody beats another person to death with a crowbar? Is that crowbar violence? What do you call it when somebody stabs 3 or 4 people to death? Is that knife violence? No. The only time we ever hear the tool linked with the term violence is when a firearm is involved. Now, remember the Santa Clara kid, the shooter, the sex-starved Elliot Rodger, who made that long diatribe before he murdered 6 people. 3 of those people he stabbed to death before he ever took up a gun, which he purchased legally in the state of California, went through a waiting period, and went through a rigorous background check in California. Still didn't stop this guy from taking 3 lives with a firearm, but he did kill 3 of his victims with a knife. Nobody talks about the knife victims anymore. It's always, oh, the mass shooter who killed 6 people.
But Dave, can I just
Sure, go ahead.
just for the sake of time here,
All right.
can I direct you back to what her question is? Because I think it's an interesting question. I think it's, what is it about guns? I grew up in Central Washington, and I grew up as the son of a farmer. I was not a gun guy. I had a BB gun. That's about it. But my dad had he had a 410 and a 22 and things like that, and I just was not somebody that was interested in it. But I had cousins and cousins that are still, and uncles that were all hunters, and there was a bonding thing there. I think that brought them together. But the idea of using a gun to hurt somebody was not really in the mindset, and I think that's I guess it's trying to understand how we today, which my feeling is that there are too many guns out there that are available for people then to get mad about something and then to act out. And there's guns that are really powerful guns that scare the heck out of me just even looking at them. So which just goes to show that I'm a real wuss about things. But anyway, the thing is that I think there is a thing about guns and that somehow that's sort of gone away. You talk about how your father may have showed you that thing, but I can see having the gun and doing that in a hunting perspective, but a gun to hurt someone, that to me is, I don't understand that.
Well, I thought I did kind of answer that. The firearm is a symbol, I guess, of liberty. You have the ability, theoretically, to say no. We're coming up on April 19th, 1775. You went to school, I went to school. We all know what happened on April 19th.
Not then, not back in 1775, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think you were, because I can tell you got gray hair, but
yeah, or two.
But no, that was the day that the battles of Lexington and Concord were fought. That was the first shot fired in the War of Independence. Now, Kyleanne, you mentioned before that you have been, or at least maybe you still are, you've been in 3 gun matches. What kind of guns did you use in those matches?
This is, I know what you're trying to get me down the rabbit hole for, and it's
not a rabbit hole. I'm just asking.
I use a rifle, pistol, and a shotgun. And
what kind of rifle?
But
what kind of rifle?
I had an old AR, but again, I have never. What you are trying to do is try to twist something which is not true, because I do not see in one way guns as some symbol of liberty. You know what is a symbol of liberty and citizenship to me? The day I raised my hand to protect and defend this Constitution. And anyone who wants to carry guns to support this country can call 1-800-Marines and they will let you do it all you want. And if someone said you need to keep your guns that you shoot 3-gun matches at the armory, at the range, 100%. Because to me, when you say why guns, because it is a sport that tests my skill and ability. And I like the challenge. And I started shooting when I was young because I could compete against the boys. And there were no gender differences in it. So for me, why guns? Because it's a sport I enjoy. That's honestly why I own guns. I think, again, there's a lot of what we've identified is, again, the symbol and emotion. For a lot of people, there is this symbol and emotion around firearms ownership as a connection to history and the past. And I think we need to call it for actually what it is, because too often this rhetoric gets brought up around, I have these guns because I'm a patriot and it's what's going to keep me. I mean, the words you use, quite frankly, here of the difference between a citizen and a subject, and in real reality here, yes, we can romanticize the incredibly brave people who worked through, who were part of the American Revolution. But in 2021, this is not, it's a different world, and we need to recognize that. We can talk about, I love guns because it is a connection to the past and it makes me feel good. That is a perfectly legitimate answer. But I think, this idea, if the government wants to kill you, they will find a way. And I think we can talk about, that's a whole nother conversation about rights. But I think, for me, that what makes me feel like a citizen is not shooting 3-gun matches. I am glad I kept, actually, most of the time, 99% of my time, I didn't keep any of those guns at home. I kept them at the range in the armory there because I knew where they were. I didn't have to worry about forgetting them or ammo or anything else. So this whole what guns did I shoot is not going to send you down some rabbit hole to get me to say, I love my AR and I will never give it away.
Let me jump in here because we have less than 10 minutes to go here before we wrap things up, but and we can flow over, I'm sure. But Dave, where do you think we can find some middle ground
Yeah.
besides
think-
gun safety?
well-
Let's get beyond that. Let's find some. Let's find some of those hard questions where we could find some middle ground.
Certainty of punishment is one thing. If you commit a crime, any kind of a crime with any kind of a weapon at all, we really need to be able to say, yeah, you're going to pay the price for that. You're going to be in prison. You're going to lose your rights. You'll never be able to vote again. All of that stuff goes into it. My suggestion earlier that we bring firearm safety into the public school system, that's toxic with a lot of people because they don't want their children exposed to firearms. And, I get all of that.
I think if there is an approach there that it was really aimed at safety and education,
Yeah.
I mean, I could go along with that. But when you talk about the punishment issue, isn't there that already?
Well, yeah, there is. And it's just like any set of laws. You got to enforce the laws that we have on the books. Now, I wasn't trying to take Kyleanne down a rabbit hole. I was trying to have her explain. Yeah, I've had these guns, and she's used them for sport, used them for competition. I'm absolutely convinced she was absolutely safe with them, and that's fine. But that doesn't make her right. Her view of this doesn't make her right. My view of this may not make me right.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot
I
of people
get that.
But okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
the word of wisdom over here from Margaret.
Well, Margaret, you jump in there, please.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll jump in for a second.
Should we call you Yoda, Grandma? Grandma Yoda? What is this? Go ahead.
Margaret is good.
Okay. All right, Sparky, go ahead.
One of the things that is really emerging is that, originally there was an innocence about guns. There was, I have a gun to hunt and feed my family. I have a gun because I've entered the militia or I'm serving my country. I have a gun because I really enjoy the skills required in the training and the community and the competition. There was a kind of innocence about this. Somewhere along the line, that's what's been lost. And that's what's terrorizing so many people, is that it's not innocent. And we don't know where to draw the line now. And we don't know how to get ourselves forward or back to a safer place, a more harmonious place. And that's, if we could kind of all work together as we go forward on both kind of, I mean, I love history, so I want to know, how did this happen? But I also, more importantly, want to know, what can we do about it? If that was the loss we've experienced and we're all playing out the consequences of that loss of innocence, either by getting no guns or you bet guns, then we can all step back from that and think about how could we do this so guns aren't in the wrong hands, so we do know where to draw the line, so we don't have school kids going to school terrified or people to the grocery store or into their place of worship frightened.
Yeah.
We could take down the fear.
Dave, I want to know what you think about what could be done to try to, I guess, the amount of what I would consider, well, all of you can weigh in on this, of just high-powered weapons that are out there today that
Well,
can.
what do you mean high powered, Enrique?
Well, you know, I'm not a gun guy, so I couldn't
Yes,
specifically.
be real careful because you're about to step on yourself here.
Well, no, I mean,
the-
but I would think that I'm like a lot of people.
Yeah.
that don't know a lot
But
of
Dave,
things
Dave,
about
I
it.
think this is actually a really good question because it gets
it is
to
a good
Margaret,
question.
but it gets to what Margaret is saying in that it has become so much of a you're going to step on yourself. You don't know what you're saying. You can't say that. Rather than, I think as gun owners, we have the responsibility to address the fear that exists because these are tools that are designed to kill. It is our responsibility to educate people about that. It is our responsibility to not belittle people and say things like, what do you mean about high powered? That's not actually an assault rifle.
Well,
That's not actually this. It's to say, look,
all I know
understand you
is
think
that
this is
it's a
scary.
gun that can fire a heck of a
Okay,
lot of
Exactly.
firepower.
Now-
it
But I'm
is-
just saying, okay, in the incidents that have happened recently, those guys had some pretty
Okay.
big weapons.
Well,
I'm just-
okay,
how do
Enrique,
we
just
how do we control that so that
Well-
people aren't going to get harmed?
you know, I don't have the $64 answer to that $64,000 question. I don't think any of us
4
do.
million. So there you go.
Well, okay, I'll
Yeah,
take
right.
I identify as a millionaire. I just don't
Yeah.
have the money.
Yeah.
But I wasn't trying to belittle you. I was trying to keep you from misunderstanding some. You know, the ammunition that's used in an AR-15 is far less powerful than the ammunition that I use in the rifle I hunt deer with.
But the fact that those weapons can fire so
Well,
quickly.
They
Sure,
were
you-
designed to damage and kill. They were designed for a very different purpose.
Let's
Yeah.
hey, let's
You know,
quit
we're
with
going to get
with-
way
with
out
the
in the
break that
weeds
down.
with this.
Why don't we no what I want to do is say, okay, how can we control that so that they're not that readily available or that, you know, keep it from someone that shouldn't have it to walk into a grocery store or to a spa and suddenly open fire on somebody.
Well,
how do we control
Enrique,
that?
I don't know how that can be done when you're talking about a right. Now, look, you can go to a car lot and sell or buy a car from somebody. The car dealer doesn't know 6 months down the road you're not going to get drunk and run a stop sign and kill a whole family trying to cross the intersection. It's the same thing with a firearm. We're asking firearms dealers to be clairvoyant, and we can't put people in that kind of a situation. And
I realize that you can't control every circumstance.
right.
All I'm asking is that where do we find some common sense on this? Just some
Well,
common,
it depends on what I think that depends on your definition of common sense versus my definition versus Margaret's definition. We all probably have different definitions of what common sense
maybe
is.
so, but I would think that the biggest thing more than anything else is that we want to value life for anybody.
Well,
And
absolutely.
that we
but-
don't want a gun used to take somebody's life.
Okay,
That's, you know,
do you want the government to start telling you what common sense is?
yeah, but
I'm
see,
not- I'm
then,
asking.
then now we go into the rabbit hole again.
Well,
Yeah,
you see,
and
there you go.
I think let's keep this. It's
Which is why I'm really hoping that all of us look beyond government for solutions.
Yeah.
In addition to government actions. But
Ex-
that's back to the idea of school children learning about this. Changing the social norms around this has a lot of potential, in my opinion. And I actually, as we're running out of time here, I want to make sure I get this thought in there. I actually am thinking a lot about this notion of common sense too. And I'm actually admit that I'm tired of hearing the phrase common sense gun reform, common sense climate change stuff, common sense healthcare, whatever it is. What I hope we can do going forward is keep looking for common ground gun reform. Working from it's a different message. It's a different feeling. You know, we stand together on common ground for, as Kyleanne said, and Enrique just said, the health and welfare of each other, our families, our communities, our school kids, our elders, our Black and brown brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters. We stand together on common ground, looking for ways to reduce the fear and the threat that does exist today.
And I just want to
How do
thank
you
you
argue against that?
so much for that, Margaret, because I think, again, it comes back to our responsibility as the ones who have chosen to participate in a right to acknowledge people's fears.
Yeah.
Not say my right is more important than your fear or your concern. That's where we get down the rabbit hole to when we want to talk about, I think, finding non-legislative solutions. I am all for, like, I would prefer non-legislative solutions to just about everything, but they start with us, I think, acknowledging that, again, since you like to bring up the Constitution, it's about a more perfect union.
Yeah.
And union implies that we care and think about each other more than we care and think about ourselves. And so if anyone is afraid, concerned, upset, and doesn't feel that they can talk to me, that they are afraid or concerned or upset about something, I have failed as a citizen of this union to look out for my fellow people. And if I try to go down whataboutisms with them, I have failed to care about somebody else. You know, we talk about in the Marine Corps a lot, our core values are honor, courage, and commitment. And that honor is upholding and how we act. Courage is having the hard things and to do things for others before yourselves. That is the root of the courage that we have. And commitment to upholding the ideas of a union, that it is not about me, it is about everybody else. And so I think really, Margaret, to underscore your point, we're going to get through this if we focus, again, our common ground is that we want a more perfect union. And that more perfect means we are always working to get there. It's not a most, it's not set. The founders never said this is the most perfect union. They said it is a more perfect union, which means we have to work at getting there together. And the only way we do this is that if we recognize that the fears, the concerns, the life, the liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as of others, of those who are in communities that don't look like us, those that don't live like us or pray like us or think like us, that matters. And I think where we're going to get to a common ground is if we say, let me think about you more than me right now. And the you as the big collective you, not you as one individual person. Let me think about the yous. Let me think about how we ensure that kids aren't scared. Let me think about how mothers of teenage Black kids aren't terrified about their kids coming home in a body bag today. Let's think about how we're concerned that parents of transgender youth right now aren't concerned about their kid getting murdered, right now. That's, if we start thinking about those yous, especially those yous that don't look like us, that's where we're going to stand on that common ground, because that is a more perfect union.
So we are over time, which is not surprising, but this is one of those things where you don't have to worry about it as much. But Dave, I want to give you a chance to kind of give some final thoughts on things here. Can we find some common ground?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think for the first step has to be that we have to acknowledge that we have a right to keep and bear arms in this country that's protected by the Constitution.
Yes.
If we focus on going after the bad guys and leaving the good guys alone, that's where you start the perfect union that Kyleanne's been talking about. And it would be nice if nobody ever hurt anybody. Believe me, I don't know a single gun owner who wants to go out and harm anybody. And I don't know a single gun owner who doesn't have empathy for all the victims of violence, whether it's committed with a firearm or somebody drives into a crowd with a car, or they burn their house down. We have that empathy. And the firearms owners that I'm familiar with, my readers, the people I talk to every day, they don't want to live in a world of fear either. Maybe that's why a lot of them own firearms. It doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different from the people who don't want firearms. And I don't have a problem with anybody who doesn't want to own a firearm. Fine, you don't need to. It's still your right. You don't need to exercise it. But don't try to step on the rights of 100 million other of your neighbors, friends, and fellow Americans to get to where you want to go.
And on that note, I thank you all for your participation this evening. I think we can safely say that this has been not boring. It's been lively. Thank you for joining us from Colorado. Kyleanne, appreciate it very much. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Grandma Yoda, for stepping in and giving us some much needed advice and thoughts as we got heated. And Dave, thank you for your thoughts. And I hope, I actually hope that this conversation sparks maybe more conversations for us to try to work on those things of common ground, which we are dearly in need of these days. Leonard, I will turn it over to you to say bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Enrique, and to Dave and Kyleanne and Margaret. A difficult conversation, but an important one. And the notion of common ground is, I think, something we'll all walk away with. Enrique, I want to especially thank you. You were a really, really skilled and helpful moderator during this conversation, and we very much appreciate it. I do want to thank, in addition to everybody on the screen, I want to thank all the 200 plus folks who joined us from all over the country. I was so inspired to see all the places people came from. I want to especially thank Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, and grandmothersagainstgunviolence.org is where you find them on the web. Really appreciate their partnership in helping us bring these important issues to you. The Museum of History and Industry opens to the public tomorrow on April 2nd. We have a great show called Stand Up Seattle, the Democracy Project. And this conversation, I think, illustrates that democracy is a work in progress. It takes all of us to make it work, to find that common ground. And I think with that, I am going to thank everybody, and we will wrap it up. If you are interested in more information on either Grandmothers Against Gun Violence or MOHAI or any of our guests, we can link you to their websites, to their email addresses, and so forth. And again, thank you all for joining us. Have a good evening.
All right, my final word is listen to your grandmother. All right.
There you go. Kudos to grandmothers.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.